Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. Our guest today is somebody very, very well known to the team here at the Tech Ed Podcast, but somebody who is new to our audience. We're really looking forward to introducing the brand new president of Minnesota's Riverland Community College. Her name is Dr. Kat Linaker. And Kat, it is awesome to have you with us.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here.
So congratulations on the new role, by the way. We're going to get into that, but it's a brand new role for you. I think it's probably equal parts really, really exciting and probably some challenges that are coming along with it as well. So we'll explore all of that. But I want to go into your background just a little bit. You know, I know, and our audience will now know, that you're the first individual from your family to attend college. And now here you are, president of a very prominent community college in the state of Minnesota. So tell us a little bit about your journey and what it means to you to be in a role like this.
So you're correct. I am the first in my family to go to college. I'm actually the youngest of 5 kids. I was born and raised in Alberta, Canada, in a small farming community. My dad was a bus driver and my mom was a stay-at-home mother until after me as the youngest went away to probably middle school. So we all worked on the neighbors' farms as hired hands. Money was not in great supply in my family. And I am, like I said, the first one to actually graduate high school and to go away to college. And I am the only one that, of course, that went on to do higher ed as a profession. So I did my undergrad at the University of Alberta, a Bachelor of Science, and then moved to the States to Minneapolis, St. Paul to go to chiropractic college. I went into private practice with a classmate. I married him, which kept me down in the States. And did full-time practice for a little over a year. I got bored. And so went back and did a radiology residency. And as part of that radiology residency, I was required to teach, which is where I fell in love with teaching and with higher ed. And so after that, I became a faculty member and then went on to start a PhD in higher ed because I wanted to be better at teaching. I wanted to be better at what I was doing. So I did that at Loyola University in Chicago. My comp exam was actually a changing point in my life because that comp exam was on a community college on the East Coast. It was a case study. And for me, it was one of those big aha moments that you get in life because I recognized what that would have meant to have a community and technical college in my small community, what it would have meant to not only my family members, but to my friends and folks I went to school with. It would have been a game changer for those folks, especially I have one brother that is still living in poverty, as is his family. So all of his children are still living in that. He never had that opportunity to go and get a skill set that would move him out of that social sphere of living in poverty. And that to me was a life-defining moment. And that's where I went. I want to get into that world because having access to training at that level allows for us to not only give folks who need the skill set to move up in the economic world, but it also, at the same time, it drives economy of the area that we serve. We provide the skilled labor, the skilled workers to all of our manufacturers and our employers in the area, whilst giving our students the skill set to take those jobs that pay very, very well. And so for me, that was the big moment in my life where it changed me from wanting to be in the chiropractic education world to the public 2-year world. It took me a while to get there, but I did eventually get into that world in New York. And then moved to Wisconsin for a while, working there as vice president of academics. And then in the last year, I decided, okay, if I want to try to become a president in this world and have a really big impact on all of those things that I just mentioned, it's time for me to look. So that's what led me to being where I am now.
and you think about just the great people and all of the opportunities that exist for people in community college space. You and I agree. It's one of the unsung huge benefits that we have available to us here in the United States is that option of going to a technical or community college. You and I first met when you were in your role as academic vice president, got to know you back then. And now here you are as president of Riverland Community College. It almost feels like this was meant to be, doesn't it? Like you're all these life experiences that you were just guided into this role. Do you wake up and feel like, wow, I am just in exactly the right place at the right time?
I do. I am so thankful that I wound up here at Riverland because, like you say, it is exactly the college that suits who I am. I am, like I said, I worked as a hired hand to some degree as a child. And we serve ag. Ag is our biggest employer in the region, followed by manufacturing, which again, it's that manufacturing and tech and trades that really got me into the 2-year. And I am a country girl at heart, so I'm feeling right at home in this small towns that I'm serving. So yeah, I'm very excited.
Really, really exciting. I'm sure the people of that community know Riverland College, Community College really well, Kat, but I would love from your perspective to share with our audience a little bit about what makes it a special place.
Sure. So Riverland College has 3 campuses in 3 they're in a triangle almost. So it's Owatonna, Albert Lee, and Austin. And we serve a large portion of the southeast section of Minnesota. We are in a heavy agricultural area, but we're also in a heavy manufacturing level. We have Hormel Foods here, we have Viacom in Owatonna, and then a ton of other manufacturers that maybe aren't quite as large. And it is a pretty unique place. We have a much different demographic in our high schools and in our elementary schools than in much of the rest of Minnesota. We have a very large Hispanic population and a large immigrant population from other areas. So I think we're about 16, 17% Hispanic right now in our enrollment. But when you look at the high schools and the middle schools, that they have a much, much higher percentage of Hispanic folks. So realistically, in the next 5 years, Riverland should probably become a Hispanic serving institution simply based on the demographics. So that is a very unique thing in the Mid-State system. We are blessed that we have the Hormel Foundation here in Austin, and the Hormel Foundation is a very unique foundation in the United States. It was set up by the founders of the Hormel Foods, and they pump millions of dollars every year into the Austin area. They are limited to funding things in the Austin region, and so there's a number of entities that they can give their money to, and we are blessed to be one of those. So we receive millions of dollars over the years, primarily through our largest piece of that is something called the Austin Assurance, which is a scholarship that if you attend the Austin Public Schools and graduate from them and do 50 hours of community service, you get a free education at Riverland. And so when we look at the impact that COVID had in enrollment across the state and across the country, we were sheltered from that I think in large part due to that scholarship that is set up by the Hormel Foundation. And the mission of the institution, like many community technical colleges, speaks to equity and to providing economic stability for students. Our mission is to transform the lives of our students. A couple of other things that drew me to the institution is, of course, Minnesota Min-State, of which we're one of the many colleges and universities in that system, has a strategic plan called Equity 2030. And the goal of that is to eliminate all opportunity gaps and educational gaps across the state by 2030. And they are all in that work, which speaks to me, obviously, because of my background. And then the other piece is this institution has something in their strategic plan and the mission, vision, and values. They have something that they've added called the heart of Riverland, which is that a statement that says that we are committed to our employees, our students, and our community. And that to me was one of the little hooks that pulled me in and said, this might be a place that you want to apply to.
You touched on the fact that the organization has a lot of great things going for it there at Riverland, but you also have some challenges in front of you as well. If you could highlight a few of those things that you think might be the challenges that you'll be working on over the next few years, Kat, what would they be?
I would say that similar to most other higher ed institutions, enrollment is, I mean, we did better than most of the institutions in Mid-State over the last 3 years, but we definitely took a hit. And enrollment at all colleges is struggling right now as students try to decide whether or not the return on investment of attending a college is worth it for them. We're seeing that, of course, with the student loan crisis and all of those types of things. Community and technical colleges, of course, have a much better return on investment than many of our competitor institutions. So that'll be a big piece for me. Other pieces would be the ongoing disruption and changes that are happening in our world around us with the increase in technology, artificial intelligence. All of those types of things have an impact on our employers. And by default, they'll have an impact on us and what programs we need to offer here at Riverland. So one of the bigger challenges will be finding out what we need to tweak in our current programs, and then, of course, what programs we need to add to our cadre of offerings. And we also need to really be focused on alternative ways of delivering that education. So as the world changes and as our employers' needs change, and as students become more and more savvy about maybe they don't really need that bachelor's degree or this degree or that degree, but they need this little piece of training or they need this little piece of knowledge, we need to develop programs that can be delivered in modules or smaller short certifications that will ladder over time to larger certifications or degrees. It's something that we need to be working with our K-12 partners. We need to start those types of things in, middle school ideally, but at the very least at the grade 9 high school level, so that they ladder into our programs and then on to our transfer partner programs. We need to provide our students coming out of high school with skills and certifications that are recognized by our employers, because many of our students have responsibilities more than what you and I maybe had as students. They are helping support their families. Many of them are parents. And so we need to help them get a better living wage coming right out of high school, and then find ways for them to continue their education whilst being full-time employed. And that means that we need to change how we do business as a higher ed institution.
It's almost a playbook for the future of higher education, everything that you mentioned. And by the way, you couldn't have teed up the rest of our conversation any better, because almost everything that you mentioned are things that I want to go a little bit deeper on. But, you think about the enrollment, or what we call the enrollment cliff, and the changing perceptions toward higher education, which, I think in many cases are all in favor of our technical and community colleges, as more and more students start to ask questions, and data and research support the idea that they're starting to ask questions about whether we need a 4-year degree necessarily to be successful, and whether certifications and skills can get us where we need to be. Certainly changing perceptions of willingness to take on significant debt in order to follow maybe a different pathway. And not that there aren't other great pathways into the 4-year institutions that need to exist and should exist, but we need to make sure that we're exploring all options with our students. But you talk about enrollment, you talk about the changing face of technology and things like artificial intelligence and supercomputing and so on, that is changing everything about our world. So technology is going to be a huge impact. The delivery that you talk about, and how do we reach more students in more creative ways and meet them where they are. If somebody's working full time, or maybe lives an hour away from the college but wants to be able to take advantage of learning opportunities, how do we create the right opportunity for them? And then going into things like certifications and understanding the importance of skills, and how our technical and community colleges can deliver on that need in our communities. I mean, that is the future of higher education, especially at the technical and community college level. And I think you went into it exactly perfectly. So thank you for that answer. And like I said, it's gonna tee us up for a lot of other deeper discussions as we continue our conversation here with Kat Linaker, who's the brand new president of Riverland Community College in Austin, Minnesota. So can you give us a little bit of a hint as you look out toward the next few years, and with the understanding that we know you're still just getting settled into this new role, what are some of the changes you're considering for Riverland?
Well, I think the changes all relate to the changing demographics that we're going to be facing as an institution, as well as the changing needs of our employers. So as we see the expansion of automation, robotics, and things of that nature happening on the manufacturing floors and in healthcare and in pretty much every aspect of our society, we as an institution need to ensure that we are offering programs that will give our students those skills they need to maintain all of that, to program it, to streamline it, as well as work with the data that's going to come out of, every single machine on that manufacturing floor, for instance, is creating data that we need to be able to mine so that we can better serve the needs of the manufacturing floor, scheduling for our students. All of those types of things are pieces that our students will need to be able to manage. So we're going to need to have programs that are specific for data analytics for the manufacturing floor or healthcare, an understanding of how artificial intelligence can impact that world, all of those types of things. And so that'll mean that we will need to tweak our existing programs, maybe create some new programs. And then also, as we see a shift in the demographics of our students, it means that we need to match the supports that our students need. So as we have a shift in the cultural background of our students, we will need to have things on our campus that support the students of the whatever cultures those are. And that will drive what we will need to do as an institution. So that will drive where I'm going to try to lead the institution.
It's going to be exciting to watch that roll out. All those things that you talk about, it's not a surprise to you. I'm a huge advocate for those as well, teaching automation, teaching advanced manufacturing, the huge role that data is going to play in the world of not just manufacturing, but as you suggest, healthcare. And I've got to believe that your background in that space is perfect as you consider how you lead the organization, the institution into the future of not just the manufacturing space, but the healthcare space, precision agriculture as well, and the way that we use data in agriculture, just all kinds of opportunities to do that. And then, again, to your point, the changing cultural needs of the community and the changing face of the student, figuratively, of course, in terms of where they're at in life and what their needs are. It's going to be really, really exciting to watch that roll out at Riverland as well. You think about we'll go back to the changing in world of manufacturing, which is where you started, and automation. And I think a lot of times people, when they think about automation, they think about automated fabrication. They think about automated welding and robotic welding and material handling, maybe in an automotive manufacturing operation. Those are the things that come to mind. A lot of times people don't recognize how much automation is taking place in the world of food processing as well. And you mentioned earlier in our conversation, one of your great partners in the form of the Hormel Foundation, if I'm getting that right. And I will just tell you that probably my greatest comfort food is Hormel chili over a bed of spaghetti. There's just nothing better. And I've driven back and forth, past the Hormel plants in Austin, literally hundreds of times, as I've spent so much time out in the western part of your state of Minnesota, particularly. But I know as I drive through there, right through Austin, right there on the north side of I-90 is the International Spam Museum. And I just have to ask you, have you been there yet?
Yes, I have, actually, last weekend. I deliberately waited to go because I've got an international exchange student. And so my daughter, my international exchange student, Julia, and I went to the Spam Museum last weekend, and we had a ball. It was a lot of fun. Got to sample Spam, and my international student, Julia, brought a cookbook, a Spam cookbook. And so I bought a can of every single flavor of Spam that is made, including a couple that you can only purchase at the Spam Museum or in foreign country. So we're having about once a week, we're having a Spam meal based on whatever the cookbook and the flavor of Spam we've got. So it's been fun. We've been enjoying it. But yeah, it's a really interesting place and worth visiting. One other thing came to mind when you were talking about farming just a moment ago is another thing that I would be remiss not to mention is we are blessed, Riverland is blessed that we are partnering with the University of Minnesota and the Hormel Foundation and expanding. It's called FARM. The project is called FARM, but it's FAARM, FARM. And it is kind of a consolidation of all of the research farms that the University of Minnesota has being brought into our county here in Moore County. And we are going to be expanding that work, and it will ladder with or partner with the Hormel Institute. So the big cancer research institute in our area that's funded through Hormel. And so we will be offering some programming, hopefully. we're still in the design phase, but it is going to significantly impact this area and therefore our college and our students in the coming years. So that is really exciting and worth at least mentioning in the podcast, because it is something that relates to the topic that we're talking about, in that will involve a lot of the artificial intelligence and the research and the manufacturing and all of that type of thing, from ag through our food creation, and then into, of course, the research with cancer and those types of things. So that's something that should be mentioned.
Without question, I'm just fascinated, frankly, by the whole idea of precision agriculture. And you think about, when I was a kid, and the a milking machine was like high tech, and now here we are, where we can measure livestock, we can measure soil, we can measure moisture, we can measure humidity. We've got all these smart sensors. We're going to get into some of that in a minute, that we're using to gather all that data. And really the ability to custom farm and to maximize production, and also farm in a sustainable way through technology is just absolutely fascinating. And certainly Minnesota is at the heart of that technology, both with your great universities and the great things that will happen at the community college. So I appreciate you highlighting that partnership. We've talked a little bit about food production. We've talked a bit about agriculture. I know you touched on manufacturing. Give us a flavor in a little bit more detail, Kat, about the types of employers and the types of industries that are prevalent in your part of the world.
We have farming. Agriculture, of course, is the largest that we serve. And then there's also large glass manufacturing in Owatonna. And then we have a lot of more traditional, smaller manufacturers in the area. So food production and then manufacturing generally. And there's a really interesting mix. We've got one company in Owatonna that creates music-related things, so things for the entertainment business or the entertainment world. We also have modular houses being built. We have a lot of different really interesting and unique manufacturers in the area we serve. But they all, when I have had the opportunity to have conversations with, at least the ones that I've had conversations so far, they all have very similar needs in regard to the skilled employees that they need. And it's, again, related to that manufacturing, being able to program and run the robots, being able to work with the data. Those types of things are universal across all of those. And I think that we're probably going to see that continue to be the case, that there'll be more and more overlap in the skills needed as we become more automated in the manufacturing world and in the healthcare and in the agricultural world. Just met with Mayo with last week, of course, and they need more nurses. They need more respiratory therapists and rad techs and those types of things. And they also need the folks that are able to manage the data, because they too are have been seeing an increase in data and the ability to use it to drive quality assurance and quality improvement in providing healthcare to patients.
Absolutely. And I think, you hit on all the highlights, of course, manufacturing, food production, agriculture, healthcare, and as we suggest, a lot of different aspects of manufacturing, not just some of the traditional manufacturing, but it's just always crazy to me when you get into specific reasons, how people are building things you didn't even know needed to be a product, but that you use every day. And I'm sure you've got plenty of those in your region as well. So that's all fascinating. And what you touch on is something that I just think about all the time, and that is how much commonality there is between so many of these spaces. So, every one of those, I call it the edge to cloud continuum. But if, we've talked about precision agriculture, I've got smart sensors and smart devices that are measuring, things like temperature and monitoring soil, monitoring livestock, monitoring farming equipment and technology, and sending that information to a PLC and then maybe to a satellite or a computer network, and then up to some cloud-based software like FarmWorks as an example. And then you've got that same continuum happening in manufacturing, where you've got smart sensors measuring, the force or resistance in a robot, sending that information to a PLC, sending it to a network, sending it to the cloud, where we've got, cloud-based software that's measuring that. Same thing in healthcare, same thing in national defense. And so every one of these verticals has that same continuum. We just call it different things. And I'm a believer, and I know you are as well, that if we can teach that continuum, we can create an entire generation of talent in the workforce that understands and can take that understanding to different spaces within our economy. And I think that's a really, really interesting way of looking at the future of education, especially in the technical education side and in the world of technology. You and I were involved in creating with others a pretty cool degree program at your prior employer that was along the idea of an IIoT technician degree at Western Technical College. And it had a lot of fun working on that project, learned a lot alongside people like Roger Stanford and Josh Gamer and others that you were tied to at that point in time. And together you created this really, really cool IIoT technician degree program. Do you see a similar need in your region now in there in South Central Minnesota or Southeast Minnesota?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, it's those skills transfer across all industries, and that need is definitely increasing. So the IIoT program was essentially, I always describe it as a cybersecurity program for the manufacturing floor, which it did that along with a bunch of other things. But that need, that concern with managing the data and keeping that data secure and being able to ensure that all of the different pieces of the equipment and the robots and such are all talking to each other and providing that real-time feedback that predictive feedback, knowing which pieces of equipment need to be serviced before they break down. That is a skill set that is desperately needed by everyone in every industry. And that is just going to continue to increase. And that's kind of what that program was trying to accomplish, was to give our students those skills to be able to graduate and get really good family supporting jobs, and at the same time meet those needs of the employers that they desperately need. There's not enough people out there with those skills right now to meet the demand.
Huge need for those positions and those roles and those employees. They are certainly family supporting jobs. In fact, we talk a lot about, in as much as we've been worried on the workforce side about the impact of automation over time, and we always have to be at least a little bit wary of that. What we're finding is that as organizations use automation, whether then there's a lot of different versions of automation, certainly manufacturing automation or robotics, but the automation is coming to every aspect of our economy. As we get closer to the automation, the jobs become more interesting and better paying and more and safer. And so why not continue down this pathway? But we are going to need an entirely new generation of workforce that understands that edge to cloud continuum. And I think the work that you did on that particular degree is just an example of how we can morph education and really think creatively about how we create this next generation of talent. To your point, it's all being driven by data. And so we're able to gather more data than we've ever been able to gather. It's not even close. And then the question becomes, what do we do with it? And the answer in many cases is some version of artificial intelligence and machine learning. We create these huge data sets. Now we have to analyze them, and we automate that analysis using machine learning to gather and to find patterns. You suggest, how can we take a piece of equipment and predict its future failure so that we can address that issue before it ever happens? And that's happening across our economy using artificial intelligence. We think about AI and the applications in the world of technology. We think about AI and the applications in the world of manufacturing, but there's huge applications for artificial intelligence in education as well. We think about things like predicting enrollment or understanding how are we going to match our instructional talent and our faculty with the demand from students in terms of, to your earlier point, meeting them where they are and being able to deliver that learning at a time that works for the student as the customer of the community college. And we can use artificial intelligence to do that. We can use it in some cases to automate clerical tasks that maybe for whatever reason we don't have the personnel to be able to perform at a given point in time, and with a shortage of labor across the entire economy, companies are finding ways to automate that aspect of their organization, as are educational institutions. So when you think day to day about the operation of a community college CAT, and you think about what's coming in the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning, put those two pieces together for us and tell us how you think AI will change the world of higher education in the years to come.
I would approach it in two ways. One, it is definitely can be viewed as a disruptor and a stressor. It can also be viewed as a tool. And it depends on the individual, how they're going to view it initially. And I think that as a higher ed leader and as I lead this institution, one of the things that falls on me and on my leadership team is to help people view it as an opportunity rather than something scary or something to fight, because it's here and it's going to grow and we need to deal with that fact. In following a lot of the online blogs and conversations and listservs and those types of things, a lot of faculty across the country are really embracing AI as a way to offload some of the tasks that are, I would describe it as the busy work of being a faculty member, the grading and the low level grading and the, assigning of tasks and those types of things that we do as faculty. And that allows them more time. It's freeing up time for them to do the piece that they really love, which is the interacting with the students and providing that high quality qualitative feedback that students need. So that will help faculty become better at teaching and serving the students in the future. Speaking about the college in regard to more the administration side, I think the same thing can be said. Right now, folks are scared of it. It's intimidating. It's new. It's something they don't really understand. I don't understand it. And I'll, admit I don't understand it. But we need to, again, view it as an opportunity and a way to, as you say, assign some of the lower level tasks that take up our time, our busy work, and help us learn how to better serve our students. So that predictive scheduling, the predictive helping us identify the students that are struggling and need intervention earlier and better through monitoring what's happening in their grading and their grades and that type of thing, through monitoring attendance, through all kinds of things. As just like everywhere else, there are thousands and thousands of data points that we pick up every day that right now it's a person trying to analyze it. And there's a limit to how much a person can do. Whereas when you start to employ artificial intelligence and computing to do those types of tasks, you can get alerts far earlier. So just as on the manufacturing floor, you can predict which pieces of equipment need to be serviced now to prevent a breakdown, I envision us being able to get to that point as a higher education institution with our students and with our faculty and staff. There's so much potential there. It's just, how do we manage that and how do we enable it to serve us rather than us fighting it and being scared of it?
I love that you make that analogy between predictive analytics and manufacturing and education. In fact, I was going to play off that and make exactly the same point, which is, you think about taking a robot and understanding force disturbances, moisture, temperature, all these different aspects of what we can measure on a robot, and then use that information across a whole field of, thousands of robots to predict future failure, because we know on average what inputs are going to create certain outputs, or what variables and what levels of those variables are going to create, for instance, a robot failure in the future, so we can then predict future failure, or for that matter, future success. The same thing is going to work in education. And if you think about all the variables, and we certainly don't have time to list all of them that can impact student success, but it's everything from, course selection and attendance, as you mentioned, Kat, food insecurity, access to textbooks, what kind of things might be happening outside of the classroom, what is that individual's best mode of learning, because we all learn a little bit differently, and taking all of these different variables and being able to predict what is the absolute best way that I can deliver learning to this specific student based upon who they are and where they are at a given point in time, and then make that learning journey as efficient as possible and maximize the outcomes with minimum input. And I think the future of education in the world of artificial intelligence is really exciting. And I think another point that you make, which is absolutely perfect and really poignant, is this whole idea of, if I'm a member of faculty, if I'm an instructor, if I'm a teacher, very few of the teachers and instructors that I know are going to their deans, are going to their college vice presidents or presidents and saying, I just have too much time. I have too much time on my hands. There's no way for me to keep myself busy. In fact, a friend of mine who's the CEO of a large manufacturing company made this point about his team as they look at automating things like accounts payable and accounts receivable and processing data. What if we can take those things that are maybe things that we can address with technology and do it that way? We're freeing up time for our instructional talent, is just one example. And then, the highest and best use of a faculty member in my mind is in the classroom with the student or online with the student, inspiring futures, helping them with individual challenges. That's the beauty of the instructor at a technical or community college. Is just one example. And we're really maximizing their time in being able to do really what they probably went into education for in the first place. I don't think most people go into education because they love grading papers. They want to change lives. And so we're maximizing the opportunity for them to do that. I think that was a really, really interesting way for you to answer that question. And I think it's going to be incumbent upon higher education as we move forward to use tools like artificial intelligence to deliver that really creative way of learning. We look at, and I want to touch on something you brought up earlier, which we call the enrollment cliff. I didn't make that up. I heard it somewhere else. But, demographically, I'm not sure how many people recognize in the world of higher education just the demand challenges in terms of market demand that are going to be facing our higher educators. And what we mean by that is if you turn the clock back to, what some call the Great Recession back in 2008 or so, and I know you know this, Kat, I'm doing this for the benefit of our audience who may not be familiar. You look back to 2008 and the birth rate in this country, it really cratered. It dropped significantly. And now we're at a point where 16, 17 years later, or whatever it is, I guess a little bit less than that, 15 years later, those students, the group of students that'll be considering higher education is just a much smaller population. So even if nothing else changes, we're going to be chasing fewer students in terms of as they decide what they're going to do after secondary education. That's going to put a lot of pressure on higher education. And I'm just curious, as we're starting to close out our time together, for your perspectives on how that enrollment cliff is going to affect higher education, not just at Riverland, but on a macroeconomic basis as well.
Yeah, we're seeing it already. If you just Google it, there are colleges closing every year, almost one a month, I think, at this point, or closing, like flat out closing or merging. There's especially the institutions that are heavily tuition dependent and who have a target of the traditional student coming right out of high school. Community and technical colleges, we are not as dependent on that demographic. About half of my students, I think, fit the traditional coming right out of high school, and the rest of them are non-traditional. So they are some of them significantly older, in their 40s and 50s and older. So it is incumbent upon us as community and technical colleges, in particular, to continue to explore that demographic, to reach out to find populations that we have not served as well in the past. So an example of that would be our justice-involved students. And I've got some background in doing that. And those students, folks that are currently in prison or in jail or have a history of, they have a criminal record, they struggle to find high-paying jobs, and we can serve them well. We can be in the prison systems. We can provide training right in the facilities that give them the skill set that when they are released into the population and they transition back into society, that they've got a skill set that will get them a good paying job. And so that's an example of a demographic or a group of people that we have not served well historically in higher ed. And that's changing. That has changed a lot in the last 5 years in particular. We also need to look at populations that we can partner with for employers. So for instance, partnering with, for me, Mayo here is right down the street. I'm actually live 2 blocks from a large Mayo hospital that needs nurses, partnering with them to upskill some of their lower paid employees into medical assisting and then laddering up to a nursing degree, that type of thing, or partnering with Hormel Foods to provide some of their lower paid employees with training at their facility after their shifts end that will allow them to get those skills that will allow them to upskill into positions that Hormel needs. So it's those types of things that we really need to do, especially in the community and technical college world. But that's something that all of the colleges and universities need to grapple with. How are they going to morph their mission and their institutions' offerings and support services to remain viable and to remain competitive in this world? Because as you say, we don't have nearly as many graduates coming out of our K-12 world. And that changes things for us in the higher ed world significantly.
We had a relatively small university not too far from where we raised our kids, about 6 blocks away or so, Cardinal Stritch University, which had a couple thousand, maybe 2,500 students. that were attending that university. And I was on my way actually to the American Technical Education Association board meeting in April and was flipping through some news stories on my phone. And sure enough, that organization, that institution was announcing that it was closing out pretty much out of the blue. I mean, very few people expected it. That was, 500 members of faculty and staff, 2,500 students whose lives were totally affected. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg for organizations that can't find a way to to use your word, to morph their way into what the future of education looks like. And I'm not saying that they weren't necessarily trying to do that, but we can see that the reality for organizations when enrollment drops can be pretty stark if we don't find creative ways to address it. And so I know that's top of mind for you, and I appreciate the answer to that question and your perspectives. Unfortunately, we're running a little short on time. I only have time for one last question here for Kat Linaker, the president of Riverland Community College. It's been a really fun conversation, but I want to turn the clock back, Kat, to your youth. You're a young individual growing up in Alberta. Your whole life is in front of you. Maybe you're considering chiropractic school. Maybe you're considering healthcare. Probably college president isn't yet on the radar, although I won't put those words into your mouth. But if you had one opportunity to go back into time to that 15-year-old Kat Linaker and give her one piece of advice, Kat, what would that piece of advice be?
It's very foundational. It would be to recognize the power of compound interest and to recognize what going into debt to go to school would do. So I was a student until I was pretty much 30 years old, and I made the choice to go to higher ed and incurred a fair bit of debt to do that. And I recognize now, looking at folks that I went to high school with who went into the trades, they're retired now. And so that for me is something that I would really love to go back and tell my 15-year-old self, even if you only invest $10 a month, do it, because it changes your economic reality as you age. And that is something that the world is learning as we look at that student loan crisis and that type of thing. So I can't change that for myself, but my 17-year-old has been investing now since she was very young. So I'm changing it for her. So that would be probably my answer to that question.
That's great advice. The value of compound interest working both ways, right? Because it works both in terms of compounding on the debt side as it does on the investment side. And to your point, being at a community college and creating these great opportunities for folks that don't necessarily require, it's certainly a significant investment. It's still a lot of money, but relative to alternatives is a much smaller amount of money that they're investing, mitigating that risk, getting done even sooner. So they're getting into the workforce earlier with less debt, earning money, investing, and that whole impact of compound interest is absolutely great advice for any young person that's listening to the podcast. And we have a number of them that do. And I'm sure they've enjoyed our conversation with Kat Linaker, Dr. Kat Linaker, the president of Riverland Community College, in a brand new role. It's been exciting to to know a little bit more about the huge opportunities that are in front of you, Kat. We certainly wish you all the best as you execute your duties as president. We know you're going to have phenomenal success, and we'll be sure and have you back to hear about it in a couple of years. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Matt. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you like this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.